It's been nearly 2 years since President Trump was duly elected, and for every day of that 2 years, politicians on the left, as well as the media, have made it their sole goal to stop Donald Trump and his agenda. It's not working. He continues to move forward in ways many people haven't seen in years. And now the left is in a panic mode, so much so that you can determine where Democrats stand just by taking the opposite position of the president. And Coulter's been studying that liberal meltdown and put it all together in a new book called Resistance Is Futile: How the Trump-Hating Left Lost Its Collective Mind. Okay, well, this book's going to be another bestseller because your last 12 were. So let us begin with resistance. I've noticed the resistance more violent than when it was during the Bush years, more nasty, more disrespectful. And why do you think that is this time?
Well, I think it's really aesthetic. They just find him gauche. He's tacky, and they can't come out and just say, oh, it's so vulgar, all the gold fixtures. So they dress it up by saying, the nation is in crisis. There was Russian collusion. But the fact that they call themselves the resistance, I mean, that's pretty interesting in itself. Hillary herself, her opponent, calls her, or normally the opponent in an election is called the loyal opposition. Mm-hmm. She said she was joining the resistance. If Trump had done that, I mean, resistance is a military term. They'd be saying it's a Klan reference. You're calling out to the right-wing militias to attack Hillary supporters.
And it has been militant because of the way they're chasing people out of restaurants. They firebombed a limousine during the inauguration. It's been incredibly violent, and we've documented that violence on a number of occasions. You mentioned the Russia situation. Is there collusion? Is there a sniff of collusion? How did this thing all start again? I forget.
Well, it's interesting. It's fun to go back and have time on Nexus to see how these things began. First of all, the first time the Russian collusion thing was ever mentioned it was just an excuse by Hillary Clinton, which she has a long history of doing. She blamed Jennifer Flowers on some man back in Arkansas who ran against her husband, and oh, he's very bitter, and he lost the election. She blamed, of course, Monica Lewinsky on the vast right-wing conspiracy. She has this history of there's always some mysterious outside actor. And by the way, Clinton later admitted, or was proved with DNA evidence, to have been guilty of those particular scandals.
Right.
And I go through this long history she has of doing this. So, of course, when WikiLeaks, when the DNC emails go up, Democrats were furious with her. The DNC was in turmoil. I mean, they were all true emails. So she invents an excuse of this apocryphal enemy, the Russians. What's interesting, Robbie Mook, her campaign manager, first time it was ever mentioned was on the eve of the Democratic National Convention. At the time, the New York Times, the LA Times, even the Daily News, putting Trump, on its cover in a clown outfit every single day, all of them mocked the idea. That David Sanger and Nicole Perlmuth at the New York Times said it was a remarkable moment. And even at the height of the Cold War, no presidential candidate ever accused another one of being helped by an enemy power, and pointed out that Mook had cited only unnamed experts. Everyone was making fun of the experts. So mostly the media just, buried these stories. Hillary would bring it up during the debate. New York Times would put it on like page A14. It wasn't until Trump won the election and Hillary, as it's described and shattered.
Exactly. They cooked up this excuse and then piped it into the bloodstream of the mainstream media. And that's when you get to hear all about the collusion and the corruption and the interference. You never would have heard that if she had won. It's very clear that was an excuse.
There's still no evidence. And who cares? Lots of countries interfere in our elections. We interfere the heck out of their elections. George Soros in particular, I have a little section on his interference in all the Soviet republics' elections, spending, I think, $1 billion. It's all carefully footnoted. But even they have never produced any evidence that it was Russia that hacked. Evidence, not allegations. They're just going to nag us to death. Nothing has changed from when Robbie Mook announced this theory. They won't. There are veterans, intelligence professionals for sanity. They were the ones who were questioning the claims about weapons of mass destruction. They used to be beloved by the mainstream media. Now they're saying, where's the evidence that Russia was even the one who hacked the emails, and no one will produce it, but they're going to nag us to death until we all agree.
Now, what do you think would make Democrats feel better? Do they want impeachment? Do they want to go back to the Obama years? I mean, if they impeach, they have Pence. Do they really want that? What do you think would make the Democratic Party happy at this point, short of, I think, literally removing President Trump from office?
Oh, as of November 8th, 2016, Trump was getting an independent counsel, and Mueller's name will be mud. They'll be taking out FISA warrants on him if he doesn't produce something on Trump. But it's been 2 years, and the best they can come up with is a campaign finance violation. By the way, if you watch the other networks, which all of my remotes are spot welded to, they're absolutely hysterical right now. Everything Trump does, exercise of political power, they're echoes of Watergate. It's Watergate. It's a constitutional crisis. The world is on fire when there isn't even a fire. It's a campaign finance violation. And as I point out in the book, John Edwards would be executed by now if Trump couldn't do what he was doing. The most important point of a campaign finance violation, I mean, there are a lot of points for why it was Trump's own money, but to make an expense a campaign finance issue at all, it has to be an expense that the candidate would not have spent but for the campaign. So in John Edwards' case, I mean, you have a pretty good argument. You have these very rich donors spending more than $1 million to support a mistress. Are they still supporting Rielle Hunter? Can we check to see if Bunny Mellon is still writing the checks?
He was acquitted for that. A jury acquitted him.
Not only was he acquitted, but the prosecution itself was ridiculed at the time. He was immediately acquitted, and the Department of Justice dropped other charges. And you kind of have a case there. So in Trump's case, of course, I don't believe the women, by the way, but that's a separate point.
Okay.
There are nuisance lawsuits. He settled the Trump University case. Is that a campaign expense?
Yeah, he didn't have to file that with the FEC.
Yeah, if he hires a new florist for Mar-a-Lago, because how can you run for office if the flowers are wilting? You can't even keep that up? Is that
only
a campaign?
The best flowers, only the most beautiful, best-smelling flowers we've ever had. So you mentioned something in your book which I found interesting, is that you can't make jokes anymore. The late-night shows aren't funny. They're hit jobs against the president. They've lost their comedic timing, I think. It's just so angry and hateful. And on the right, you're not allowed to make jokes anymore because you're labeled a bigot or a racist or a homophobic person. It's like you can't even, Americans aren't with each other anymore. Everybody's just against each other, and you can't laugh sometimes at each other.
No, that's right. We're not working together in the era of Trump, and it's not Trump's fault. But comedy, normally a joke, it's a joke. It's recognized. There's a clever little twist at the end. Now comedy is just a long string of invective, and the number of syllables. You use an SAT word like feckless, throw in a curse word about the president.
That's right. That's all they have.
And the audience applauds, and HuffPo loves it.
And even the president himself, when he said, Russia, if you're listening, could we get some of Hillary's emails? I think Mueller's looking at that statement for collusion.
An obvious joke. And by the way, you know who the first person was to tell that joke? It's in the book. I was so excited about this because I did a full Nexus search.
Who was it?
Kimberly Guilfoyle.
Oh!
On The Five, your show. And then it was told by Bobby Jindal and Scott Walker in the debates. It was mentioned by all these newspapers, and they all thought it was a great joke. They were giving, I forget who it was, either Walker or Jindal, best line of the debate. But then Trump says it. No, we're taking him seriously. It's a secret message to Putin. They've lost their minds.
They've lost their minds, and all of those people were crying when Trump was elected. All of the people that are supposed to be independent journalists, which you see them all these shows, the Meet the Press people, these pundits that are above it all, they were in tears when Hillary lost, and now they present themselves as these objective arbiters of truth and honesty in America, and they nitpick everything this president says, and they're supposed to be fair. I mean, they're working for the Democratic Party, and then when Trump says you're working for the Democrats, he says you're the enemy of the truth or the enemy of the people, they say, oh, We're under attack now. We're in danger. Meanwhile, it's the Trump supporters who are getting punched in the face.
Yes, yes. It's like we're living in 1984 with, you know, this apocryphal Emmanuel Goldstein enemy. and actual conservatives are getting beaten up and needing bodyguards. One thing about the comedy thing, conservatives are still, and certainly Trump is still telling jokes, but you're right, we're at risk of being thrown in prison for microaggressions. But what I like about how the resistance has changed the left is liberals have always, I mean, especially in New York and Vanity Fair, Spy Magazine, they've always kind of prided themselves on being cool. Well, don't you have to be cool to be cool? They're the ones, they'd make fun of conservatives for freaking out over things and conspiracy theories. They're the ones freaking out, and conservatives are perfectly fine.
That's right. I think Trump's just cooler than they are, more talented and funnier, and they can't take it. And there it is. Everybody buy it. Resistance is futile.